Welcome back to the action from the South African National Cross Country Bike Championship, proudly brought to you by Pepson Plastics and Yamaha. With the time trial done and dusted, everyone formed them lines up in the queue and would go out and do the chase down. Cox had set himself up perfectly to line up inside of the top 5 and try and chase down on the overall. Brett Swanepoel was back up to full speed, and Sharon Moore as well as King Kenny were there to set about nailing down their championships. Nerves were definitely starting to pick up in the queue. Last minute set-ups on the bikes. Van Deventer in the off-season had made the change across onto the Yamahas. And on the sidelines, it was a bit of note-taking from Widehand and Alfie Cox himself. The timekeepers were good to go. The riders were locked and loaded. And Sharon Moore was the first rider to drop the clutch, drop the hammer. And he was going to try and see no one else for the rest of the day. Cox was going to be on, as he likes to say, the small bike, but he has made the 250 his own category. And sometimes in the tech terrain, the smaller bike can pay the bills and bring you all the way. Brett Swanepoel was back onto the gate as well on the Pepson Plastics factory Husqvarna, and he was going to be a massive threat to try and take away the title from Jazzman. Jazz was running the number 2 plate, although he was reigning champion, crowned at the end of 2019 on the OR2s. Van Deventer likes to see what he can do, and I think this may be his season as well. If he can stay injury-free, he's one of those riders that can grip it and rip it. Taki Bojorges has come back from some big back injuries 2 seasons ago and was going to be a rider to watch out for. Definitely a podium threat. Then Mikey Pentecost, who had done a miracle ride just 1 week ago on one of the regional events with almost no brakes, but his aggressive style may not be the right approach. Scotty Haygate, making the switch across from motocross, was definitely going to be a rider to watch out for as he starts to make that very difficult move from groomed motocross tracks to natural terrain. We go on board with Scotty as he crests the Widowmaker. From Zambia, but schooled in KZN, so this kind of riding terrain will feel semi-similar, and we do see a lot of KZN guys perform really well when we go out into the mountains. With no Bolly van Rooyen, it was an open gate as far as the Seniors Championship went, and last year's runner-up was Wade Blau. He was going to be the man to watch as he looked like Dart all the way up to the Widowmaker. They'd be working well together in the early stages of lap number 1. Spectators lined the Widowmaker and were enjoying the show. They would mission out onto some of the flatland sections to try and catch up with some of the pinning riders. But it was, in the early stages at least, very technical, with around about a 35-kilometer average speed of our top pros as everyone, one by one, cleared the gate. Lines started to form on the Widowmaker, making things a little bit easier further down the queue. And it did allow some of the support riders a little bit of extra breathing room. One of the local yokels, who got his mixture slightly wrong, but his riding style paid him back in spades, as he made a lot of the pros look very amateur as he cleaned the Widowmaker on his first go. With pro categories, support categories, and a couple of juniors making the trip up to Lesotho, it was going to be nice to just kick off that dust and get loose and get going. Yes, indeed, this is a off-road and cross-country race, but it does look like some of the lower land sections of the Roof of Africa. Some of the high-speed pinners would have been caught napping coming into this kind of terrain. Some of the multitask riders who race in both championships would have had a very early advantage in this type of terrain. Almost looks like baboons from the Roof of Africa a couple of seasons back. Tristan Purton made a double contract signing in the off-season. He was going to race motocross and national off-roads as well. This would be his first trip ever up into the mountains of Lesotho. Taki was running nice inside of the top 10 and also just easing his way back into it. Didn't want to make any mistakes in the early part of the season as the rest of the riders just started to feel their way around. This was underneath the Roma Bridge as well, so an area that a lot of the Roof of Africa competitors know, and confirms that we were staying in the lowlands. Ian Rawle, who's definitely a championship threat in the OR2 category, was staying 1 position ahead of Wade Blau. Blau is a bit of an old school rider, so he'll have known how to attack the terrain in off-road and tech like this as well. Like I said, we also had the junior categories going out there. Johnny Luck was going to be one of the riders to watch out for. He'll have definitely had a small town advantage knowing the home terrain, but we had around about 7 or 8 juniors making the trip up there, and they had their own specific route to go, which was much more flatland than the pro senior riders. But great to have the juniors along on the tour. Remember, it's aspirational racing this as well, so the juniors get to pit with the factory pros as well, and maybe one season get to go and race against their heroes. Time for a snack up in the mountains with the Basutu people as we go down into the riverbeds once again to catch up on Ryan Peltzer. He was running a top 10 in the overalls and trying to fight hard for a top 5 on the category. This season, the OR3s, that's a 250 class, was going to be an absolute nail-biter with a couple of high schoolers moving up and keeping things nice and busy. That's the Ripper, Ryan Ripley, who's moved up into the factory squad for Husky, and Dylan Cox, one of the RBS Yamaha boys, looking good on the 125. High schools also is going to see a new champion this year with a lot of riders moving up. Wilson was running 2-spot at this stage. Another rider on the fly as well coming back into the pro ranks was Vaynard Delport, a new signing to the CIT Factory Husky squad and trying to chase down a top 5. Hunter Simon was there as well, trying to stay inside the top 3 for the seniors. And Butterbean, D. Gray, was doing a rock and roll job on the 250 Yamaha. Farmer was getting the job done. Untouchable on the Masters Gate at this stage. Back on board with Scotty Haygate as we flew down into the lowlands. That looked like he just made the pass on Van Deventer, who was starting to fade backwards, and Scotty was starting to find his groove. But once again, we would go into some of the crazy passes. But no one was going to get lost. Altus de Vet and his crew did a stellar job of marking. Everyone was running GPS, but that was just backup. Pentecost, unfortunately, missed one of the lines. Tried to go a hot line through the river, drowned his bike completely. He was going to be biting his fingernails to try and stay in it. But it looked like it was all over for Pentecost, who was having a great comeback up until that point. For the seniors, Akim Bergman had moved up into the factory squad. JC Nienober wasn't enjoying life in the mountains. Someone else was, though. The chopper was getting some great shots of what was going on in the lowlands. Riders weren't pinned, which meant everyone was starting to group nicely. And some of the riders that weren't too happy with navigation were starting to just live on the back wheel of each other and find their way through come the end of lap number 1. Wide Hand was doing a little bit of marshal work, making sure no one else drowned their bikes, setting them down the sweet spot into the riverbed, staying away from the wet stuff. This was Pentecost. It looked like it was game over for the guy that was probably going to rock his way through up to a top 5.
Can't even explain what happened. Just slid off the flipping rock, drowned the bike underneath the water, race over. Eh?
And that is what Lesotho can do to you. Last year, the guys got a taste of it as Lesotho did host a round of the national championships just over the halfway marker of 2019. So the guys that went up there last year will have had a definite advantage. For Scotty Haygate, this was his first trip to the mountains, even though we stayed into the lowland sections. And as the lap went on, Scotty was starting to look pretty tasty. Not a bad place to grab a little bit of building rubble as well, down in the riverbeds. Muddy Pool, one of the most consistent riders out there racing off-roads and enduros, will have known exactly how to approach this event. Calm and steady is what Lesotho requires. If you try and pin it, you will be punished. No problems for our race leader though. Charon Moore was making his way down towards the end of lap number 1 with no one anywhere near his tailpipe. Looked like the Live Lesotho Roost KTM man was going to get gone. The fight for second place was starting to heat up quite nicely. Brett Swanepoel had started to look comfortable in the 2-spot, but Brad Cox was building pace and starting to catch up. In the motocross section, Charon was doing a great job of putting on a show for the spectators, bringing all his ISDE experience to the fray. Cox was on a ripper as well. Confirmed that he'd moved up into the number 3 spot and was nowhere near being caught by anyone else. The rest of the riders were really challenged to try and hold the pace of the top 3 as they neared the end of lap number 1. Cox was just building pace the whole way through, clearly one of the faster riders in the motocross section just before the end of the lap and coming into the pits. We're going to take a small break with a small message.
Welcome to Lesotho.